This video will contain a brief overview of the Old Testament Canon. In other words, the books that make up the Old Testament in various Christian traditions and in Jewish tradition. So, most of us who are taking or teaching this course will be used to what is the Protestant canon. This contains two elements, the books that are included and the order in which they occur. So, in most of our Bibles, we have what's called the Pentateuch, Genesis through Deuteronomy. Then what are classified as histories, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, the two books of Samuel, two books of Kings, two books of Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. Then poetical or wisdom books, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. And then the prophetic books, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, and the 12 minor prophets. This is the Bible that we are used to. The Jewish canon contains the exact same books, but they are numbered somewhat differently and they are in a different order. And we will see later the significance of this. So for Jews, the first 5 books of the Bible are Torah, instruction. Then the prophets, but you'll notice that they include Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. The books of Samuel are considered one book. The books of Kings are one book. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and then the book of the 12. So all the minor prophets together make up one book. Then there are the writings. Psalms, Proverbs, Job. Then the festival books, Song of Songs, Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, Esther, sometimes called the Megillot, the 5 scrolls. Daniel, which is not considered a prophetic book in Jewish tradition. Ezra, Nehemiah together, and the 2 books of Chronicles together. And this numbering ends up with 24. So the 5 in the Torah, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in the book of the 12, and then the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 in the writings. Now, sometimes Chronicles is not the last book. Sometimes it is placed as the first book in the writings. The 5 scrolls, or Megillot, are usually grouped together because they are used on different festivals. So Song of Solomon is used at Passover. Ruth is read at Pentecost, the Feast of Weeks, or Pentecost, Shavuot. Lamentations is read on Tish B'Av, which is the 9th day of the month of Av, when the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. Ecclesiastes is read at Sukkot, the Feast of Booths, and Esther is read in the Feast of Purim. So the Jewish order starts with Genesis, the beginning of all things, Deuteronomy, on the verge of the Promised Land, continues in the prophets with Joshua, the entry into the Promised Land, the Kings, loss of land and exile, and Malachi, looking toward the coming of Elijah. Lo, I will send you the prophet Elijah before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. The writings begin with Psalms, the songs of the temple, and Chronicles ends pointing toward the restoration of the temple. Thus says King Cyrus of Persia, "The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you of all his people, may the Lord his God be with him. Let him go up." So everything has a certain order within Jewish tradition. I should say, however, that this ordering primarily, except in the larger groupings, Torah, prophets, and writings, happens once you have codices or book forms where you can include more than one book in a codex. The same is true in the Christian ordering. So the Christian Protestant order begins with the Pentateuch, Genesis, the beginning of all things, and it follows to some degree uh, the Jewish order, Deuteronomy, on the verge of the Promised Land. But while it begins, or Joshua follows directly after entry into the Promised Land, this section in the Protestant Bibles kind of follows the chronology up through life under the Persian Empire. The poetic and wisdom books kind of have a historical order as well. Job is connected with the time of the patriarchs, Psalms connected with David, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon connected with Solomon. The major prophets are given in chronological order, and the minor prophets end with Malachi, looking toward the coming of Elijah, pointing toward the New Testament. So same books, numbered differently, but with a different order and sort of a different meta-narrative, a different overarching narrative. Now, in the Roman Catholic Church, you have the same books as in the Protestant canon and the same order, but you have additions. You have editions of books which were part of the early Septuagint or Greek Bibles. And throughout Christian history, there's been sort of some tendencies. I wouldn't necessarily say they were always disagreements until the Reformation, but some people wanted to include only those books from Jewish tradition, and some people wanted to include others which were Jewish writings, but were not originally written in Hebrew, or at least as far as people knew. It is interesting that Sirach or Ecclesiasticus, they actually have found a Hebrew original. So those books here that are marked in red are books that are included in the Catholic Bibles, not in Protestant Bibles. They're usually in Protestant publications termed as Apocrypha, whereas in Catholic tradition they are called deuterocanonical. So they include things like Tobit, Judith, the additions to Esther. Esther is a longer book. First and Second Maccabees. Among poetical or wisdom texts, this includes Song of Wisdom of Solomon and Sirach, Ben Sira Ecclesiasticus. In the prophets, Baruch, with the letter of Jeremiah, is included after Jeremiah. In some Christian traditions, the four books of Jeremiah, Lamentations, Baruch, and the letter of Jeremiah were all included in one book as all being written by Jeremiah. In Catholic Bibles also, there are additions to the book of Daniel. I should mention that these books are, for the most part, within Protestant tradition, considered books that are edifying, that are good to use, just not as authoritative. Some traditions, such as the Anglican Church, include readings from some of these books. Now, the Eastern Orthodox canon includes pretty much the same books as in the Catholic Bibles, but with a few differences and a few differences in naming. For example, both Samuel and Kings are all called kingdoms, 1 through 4 kingdoms. First and Second Chronicles are called Paralipomenon. You have, in addition to Ezra and Nehemiah, something called First Esdras or 3 Esdras. You also have third Maccabees, and in Georgian Bibles, that is the Georgia near Russia, you have 4 Maccabees included. The Psalms includes one additional book, which interestingly was found in the Psalm scroll among the Dead Sea Scrolls. You have the Prayer of Manasseh, and otherwise the same books as in the Catholic canon.